It's time to revisit a whole bunch of old buried history. Kyle McCord, UCLA, Scott Frost, that's coming up. Let's talk.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase.
All right, welcome to a Thursday show. We will open up the mailbag today. Connor Happer from 1620 The Zone here, Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. A whole bunch of questions from this week. A lot of retrospective, like, hey, how'd we get here? But that's kind of what you do in a bye week, you know, as there's a lot of mystery coming up.
Still the bye. It's still the bye. Until you play again, you're still on a bye.
Yeah, especially this one, because we have no idea what's going to happen on Saturday in Los Angeles.
We've heard from no one. We've heard from Matt Rhule a couple times. We'll hear from Matt Rhule again today on Thursday before the Huskers leave on Friday for the West Coast. I expect really not much of an update. Of course, I was badly mistaken about what Matt Rhule was going to say on Monday when he stepped to the mic. So maybe he'll come in today and announce a quarterback and whatever else people are looking for. But in reality, these Thursday media sessions are pretty insignificant. And I'd expect that after a week of keeping things very quiet, it will be more of that on this Thursday as we inch toward Nebraska at USC on Saturday at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum.
That would be my expectation as well. So let's dive into the questions. Got a few from the email, from YouTube, from Twitter. So let's start here. Yes, appreciate you guys submitting these. Here's Andrew from YouTube. Looking at Kyle McCord's performance at Syracuse so far this year, would you start him over Rhule for these next 3 games if a hypothetical NFL-style trade brought him to Nebraska?
Yeah. Okay, so I think we should attack this as if it doesn't have any kind of ramifications for, if we're going to go NFL, then let's go NFL like Dylan Rhule is signed to a 6-year contract. So we're not worrying about whatever ramifications might come in December if you were to replace the freshman QB. Let's just say, who would you rather have? McCord coming in via trade or Rhule continuing in his freshman season progression? I should note, Kyle McCord, the former Ohio State QB who was interested in Nebraska last year, made a visit to Nebraska right as the Huskers got back into the Dylan Rhule sweepstakes. He leads the nation in passing yards per game this season for the Cuse, who are 6-3 under first-year coach Fran Brown. And McCord also leads the nation in interceptions with 12.
Okay, so we're changing the world as we know it. Yeah, I think you take these 3 games and you get Dylan Rhule healthy, and you get his confidence back in the offseason and reset the deck next year for sure. But those are fake circumstances. So
we're having fun.
That's the question. My answer is yes. You would do that. And really, it's
you'd go with McCord.
That you get Dylan Rhule healthy, and you don't push him back into playing time. I'd start McCord.
Right, he's a different level of experience. And I'm also throwing out actually I'm not, because that just is impossible. If this was an NFL-style trade and you brought a player in for the playoff run, you're trying to get a wild card, and your quarterback is down on his luck and hurt, you need a backup, and it turns out that the backup is a veteran from a division or another conference, whatever. He's going to AFC to NFC. This is Kyle McCord. He's still got to learn things. He's got to learn the plays. Like NFL offenses are somewhat similar, but it's not like a receiver coming in at the midway point and just sliding into the offense. I think it would be really difficult. But if let's say you had Kyle McCord on your bench and he was every bit as talented, he had come at the start of the year and had been sitting behind Rhule. Yeah, I think you would take that proven QB. Nebraska sends a freshman out there at this point, especially a freshman who's been struggling with some things, including I think his confidence as his injury status has progressed. And it would be nice to be able to have someone with that kind of experience and background to potentially get you through to one or two more wins. But Nebraska does not have that option.
No, they don't.
It's not that option.
Now, if we apply it to college football and how college football works, let's just say that both of those guys are on the roster. And I don't know what circumstance would have led to that, but both those guys are on the roster, and he's been sitting the entire year. McCord has. That becomes a more tricky question. I think it becomes a more interesting question, and it once again surrounds, almost completely, I think, Dylan Rhule's health, right? Like, you're not going to put him out there unless you absolutely have to, which I still think is the case, but it does change it changes the math on it quite a bit. Yeah. I don't know what I would do in that case.
Yeah. Kyle McCord's having a nice season in the ACC. There's a reason that Nebraska chose Rhule over McCord last December, and I think all of those principles still exist today.
All right, one more before we get to a break here. Here is Logan. He says he listened to the show from last Friday. Thank you. You discussed former coaches and the input they could possibly offer for Matt Rhule. I've always thought Scott Frost would be an awesome addition to the staff, even if it's just in an analyst role. Scott struggled to run the monster that is that entire program, but I thought his ability to call plays was our biggest asset at times. What an opportunity for him to right some wrongs. I find his career path to be somewhat similar to Lane Kiffin. Too much drama? Would Husker Nation want him back? Would he be able to put his ego aside? What are your thoughts? Also, he adds that he loves the show, which is greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Logan. In a perfect world where there are no egos or
feelings,
other outside influences, like would Scott Frost ever want to live in Lincoln again? Yeah, I mean, Scott Frost could be a nice addition to any staff as an offensive mind, as a play caller, as an analyst, just as someone, you talk about having the different perspective that Holgorsen and Phil Snow were able to bring these past couple of weeks. Absolutely. Scott would be good at that. In putting it into reality, like into practice, it probably could never happen. Certainly not in this regime. It's kind of like the Frank Solich situation where, and I don't mean the circumstances were the same. I just mean when you leave and you have that kind of history, that kind of those kind of deep ties to a program, it takes a long time to get over the hurt. And no matter who's at fault or what the issue was, it would take a long time to come back home in that scenario. And we see, fortunately for Solich, he was able to move past that, but it took 20 years, almost 20 years, 20 years from 2003 to 2023 for him to come back. Steve Peterson has never come back. I don't know if there's anyone who has a desire for him to come back, but I think the feeling is mutual. And right now, Scott Frost is very much still in that same kind of zone where, I mean, does he ever come to the state of Nebraska? Yeah, I mean, sure. His mother, Carol, lives in the state of Nebraska. Does he come anywhere near Nebraska football? Nope. Do I expect that could happen in now or in the near future or even the immediate future? I do not.
No, maybe someday, maybe down the line. As for Frost's bona fides, I mean, I think he would be a terrific offensive coordinator, to be honest with you. what Logan said about his chops as a play caller and a play designer, and his resume throughout his career would lead you to that exact conclusion. I just think there was, he was the head coach at Nebraska, and it was a lot, much like Dana Holgorsen. Like he was the head coach at West Virginia, at Houston, and it was just harder than we want it to be. And that's a different deal than Nebraska. So I think Scott Frost would be an excellent offensive coordinator for somebody now or in the near future. And like, if you could take all the feelings out, like you said, Mitch, then would he be a terrific offensive coordinator for Nebraska? Sure. But you just can't. You can't remove that stuff, and it's too soon. But yeah, I do think Scott Frost is a heck of an offensive coordinator and an offensive mind.
I think his trend in his career path is probably more NFL geared. I don't think he's out of football forever, and actually he's back in. He's working for the Los Angeles Rams this season as analyst, some kind of a role like what Dana Holgorsen was doing at TCU before coming to Nebraska last week. And I think Scott could find a way in to the NFL where it's just, college football is a business, but the NFL is a different level. They're just feelings just are not a part of it. I mean, they are, but they are so more rapidly set aside, and it's just, you do your job. And I think that he would fit well in that kind of a situation. That's where you've seen another former Nebraska head coach, Bill Callahan, thrive, because he doesn't have to deal with the stuff. And he's just been able to go back to his role coaching offensive linemen. I mean, a genius at that part of the game. And I think some of those same things probably apply to Frost when it comes to offense and play calling. And he could thrive very much in a role as a play caller or a QB's coach or a wide receivers coach at some point. But I think the NFL is more likely than him ever stepping back into the college game.
It takes a different type of person to be the head coach. And maybe you possess it at a smaller level, but this one's a little bit different as well. All right. We'll take a break. We have plenty more questions here on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Appreciate you all subscribing and giving us these questions to answer today. Keep doing that and keep interacting with the show. We'll be back after this. All right, it's Apper here for FanDuel Sportsbook, which is, of course, America's #1 sportsbook, and you can get ready to tackle the NFL or any other sport with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's all in the new FanDuel Sportsbook app. It gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL on Sunday, which is a fantastic asset to have at your fingertips. And you get that hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest live stats, view play-by-play, and so much more right on the same page where you place those bets. Once again, you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Seems easy, right? Why not check it out? FanDuel.com. Head to FanDuel.com to join today. And that's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Okay, back with you on this Thursday, the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer is here with me. Soon I will be on a plane on my way to sunny Southern California. Looking forward to that. It is November in the Big Ten, and this is what we do. We go to the beach. We're going to get back to some mailbag questions, but I probably need to mention something that has happened this week before we go too far into this mailbag. So our podcast received some fortunate publicity. Maybe was it unfortunate publicity? Connor, we became the butt. I'm sorry, I say we. I became the butt of a joke by the great jokesters at the Schick and Nick show. Thank you, Matt and Nick, for pointing out that earlier this season on the Locked On Nebraska podcast, I called the Indiana Hoosiers the Indiana Hooters, and that made its way to their fine and fun show. It was good for a giggle, huh?
Oh yeah, it's great for me as a listener of that podcast. It caught me by surprise. I thought, what am I about to say? But it was you who stuck your foot in your mouth. That's amazing. I was elated to find that was the case. It was great.
So I had no idea that I said this. I mean, I'm sure I did in the moment, but I had long forgotten it. It was from several weeks ago. They were sitting on this, probably sitting on it until Indiana got to 10-0, just to rub it in a little bit more because everyone's paying attention to them. They're the story in all of college football. I was thankful to them that they did not rub it in my face because in the process of calling them the Indiana Hooters, I was essentially saying they were a fraud. And at like 4-0 or whatever Indiana was at that time, I said, this is not a top 10 team. Come on. And
something that definitely nobody else said for sure. 100%. Nobody else had that take.
Nobody was feeling that way, right?
No.
Okay. Let's get back to this. Speaking of Indiana, one of its victims, its roadside massacres was UCLA back in September when Indiana made a trip out to the beach for some Big Ten football and dispatched of the Bruins. The Bruins have come storming back and have beaten Nebraska and Iowa in the past couple of weeks. Scott on email has a question about that. He says, in respect to Nebraska, what does UCLA's 20-17 victory against Iowa tell us? Is it that UCLA is better than we thought, that Iowa is not as good as we thought, or is it that Nebraska is screwed either way? So I'm not sure if Scott meant that last part about Nebraska to be a question or a statement, but I read it as a question.
Yeah, I don't think on Iowa, I don't think really any differently of Iowa than I ever have. I mean, it underscores the idea that they live in the margins. They always have lived in the margins. And this year they're a little bit more, that gap is a little bit wider. So I don't think much less of them. That's going to be it was always going to be a tough game for Nebraska, a game that they'll still have a chance to win. Also, they were playing with their fourth string quarterback in that game for a portion of it, who was I think a former walk-on linebacker. Not good. Not pretty either way, but that team can run the ball and play defense and all the rest. And
Caleb Johnson, he's still there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that guy's one of the best in the country. But UCLA has definitely surged. I mean, they are a better team than they were a month ago or 2 months ago. That's for sure. So it's a little bit of both. But I don't think there's that much to glean of it from Iowa. That game is still going to be a challenging one for Nebraska.
Yeah, I read it as UCLA being better than we thought. UCLA is officially better than we thought when November dawned and you saw that 2-5 come into Lincoln. Any word on the subject of Iowa? Any word from our friends to the east on if the quarterback issues are going to be something that lingers into, say, like the Black Friday time of year? Have you had any discussions with anyone? Talked about that on your radio show? I see you furiously Googling. So what's
I don't know what Brendan Sullivan's status here is for going forward, because
I'll say this.
I mean, Cade McNamara, they lost him, and then they lost their guy behind him too, and so you're just stuck with Sullivan. If he goes out for any portion of time, then you're really in trouble.
I'll say this about UCLA: if it wasn't for one Kurt Cignetti, Deshaun Foster would be in the conversation for, dare I say, Big Ten Coach of the Year. I mean, yeah, you have to look at Dan Lanning, I think, but what Foster has done in the second half of the season is fantastic for a first-year coach. And there were a lot of questions about him coming into the season because was it like, hey, UCLA is strapped for cash and they just went and found a popular former player who'd been on staff? Is this really the right thing for the Bruins to do? And he's proven that he's very much up to the job and has that team playing its best football in November.
It seems as if both are short-term, both the top guys, McNamara and Sullivan, are shorter-term injuries. Right. Yeah, McNamara was a concussion and Sullivan was an ankle injury. So, if you still have a conversation to have if both are healthy, but that seems to be more of the conversation rather than will they be available?
Yeah. So Nebraska's likely going to see one or both of those QBs, Iowa's top two of their top three, when the Huskers go to Iowa City on the day after Thanksgiving, coming up here in just a couple of weeks. It is 2 weeks from Thanksgiving today, Connor.
Crazy. Goes by really fast.
It does. Okay, let's come back after the break, and we have another question from Scott. This one about Dana Holgorsen, and it involves his headwear. So we will get to that when we are done with this message. Okay, Mitch Sherman here to tell you about Game Time. I'm going to tell you about Game Time because basketball season is here, and Game Time makes getting tickets to basketball games so much easier. You buy a ticket on Game Time, you're likely to see something memorable in a basketball arena around this state or around wherever you live, whether it's a college basketball game, an NBA game, you name it. Basketball produces drama. Game Time is here to make sure that you see that. It also offers tickets for concerts, shows, football games, whatever is going on where there is a ticket required. You go check out Game Time. Check out the feature on the app called Game Time Picks. What that does is filter out the fluff to show you only the best deals on the best seats, so you don't waste your time searching through thousands of options. Game Time allows you to customize your spot in the arena. I love that you can get curated deals to make it easier to find the best prices on great seats. Game Time provides seat views before you buy. The Super Deal, that's a unique feature that you should examine. It's got event cancellation protection, and as always, there's the lowest price guarantee. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app today. What time is it? It's Game Time.
All right, we're back. Let's rip through a few questions as we finish out this Thursday show. Scott has a question. Actually, he's got a couple takes first. He sees the Holgorsen move from both sides. One, this could be viewed as a desperate move made by a desperate coach who is grasping at straws. Or the other side, this is a shrewd move made by a cutthroat coach who will exhaust every option to win now. The results are going to tell us the answer, I guess.
Yeah, so we're going to find that out when we see what Holgorsen does. Like, that's how it's going to be painted. It could go either way.
But the big question is this. Scott has a strong aversion, he says, to football coaches who wear visors. Please tell me that Coach Holgorsen won't bring that abhorrent visor trend to Lincoln. Not really a question. Just tell me this.
Comment. This is a comment in the mailbag. I can't tell you that. I don't know. I did a little bit of research on this, and I discovered, and I can see this now as I think about watching these games. Lane Kiffin, Gus Malzahn, Mike Gundy, Chip Kelly, Kirby Smart. There's an SEC flavor to that. Gundy, of course, being a Big 12 guy. These are the guys who wear visors on the sideline in college football. Some retired coaches started this trend. Steve Spurrier, probably the OG in visor wearing. But Bob Stoops was a big visor wearer. Gary Patterson, the former TCU coach, he liked to wear the visor on the sideline. It's a Southern thing, right? Is that what we can take from this? Do you see a lot of Northern coaches wearing visors? Maybe Chip did it. Chip do that at Oregon?
Yeah, he had it at Oregon. In the Big Ten, you're going to see more like stocking caps at the end of the season. I can't recall a single Nebraska coach who has worn a visor. You'd have to think back to probably the early and mid 2000s when the trend, it felt like, was really taking off.
Maybe a coordinator, maybe like Sean Watson, maybe wear a visor. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Maybe Tim Beck. Could have been. He had the hair. So I'm not totally against it. Dana Holgorsen is a different guy. That's what we're going to come to realize about him over the next couple of weeks. And maybe if we get the chance to talk to him, he's cut from.
We'll ask that question.
Needs
to be one of the first questions, you think?
And people asked Matt Rhule about the smock, and he was seemingly confused about the question. And now we have Dana Holgorsen with the visor. This is of utmost importance.
Rhule doesn't really, he's kind of retired the smock. No?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, we don't see it.
On the quarter zip of the jackets and stuff like that. So I don't think if I had to guess, I would say that you do not see Dana Holgorsen in a visor at Nebraska.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he's trying, when you wear a visor, you're kind of trying to get some sun on your hair. Is that part of it? I mean, Dana's got an interesting hairdo going. You might want to get that some lighter coloration through that hair that the sun can provide. Maybe that's why the South is a place where you see the visor more often. I mean, and like Rhule with the smock, I mean, he's about to be 50 years old. And I just don't know if that's the right look for a 50-year-old. So it could be a similar thing with Dana.
So I'm looking at a picture. There seems to only been one documented time he was he was when he was at TCU earlier this season, serving as in sort of an analyst role. I see him here at a press conference, and he is wearing a full hat, but he does have the salad, the lettuce coming out the back. It's pretty good still. I was wondering because we haven't really seen him. I mean, since last year, and he was wearing a hat last year too. So I think he's kind of retired the visor. It seems like he's got
graduated to a hat. All right. Yeah. Okay, Scott, we were able to answer this for you. We think Dana's gone hat. Yeah. He's going hat. Yeah.
Once you go hat, you don't go back, I guess. Here is Mitch via email, Mitch and GI, a frequent listener and commenter on the show. What players who are playing for redshirt seasons can we expect to play in the last 3 games? Should we expect to see Malachi Coleman get involved?
Yeah, it's like the season-long question. Is Malachi Coleman going to play in this game? I think that if he's shown that he deserves some playing time based on the way that he's practiced, then you could see him. But Nebraska's not going to put, say, Isaiah Nair on the bench in order to get a few reps for Malachi Coleman in a game that is undecided, unless Malachi has just turned it on to a new level on the practice field. I mean, more so than what we saw early in the year at Nebraska. We talked about this a little bit on the show Wednesday. Nebraska is going to look for some opportunities to sprinkle in young players, but it's not like, okay, you've got 3 games, you're going to go play these 3 games. Perhaps some young receivers, some young DBs, and a lot of these guys have gotten into like 1 game or 2 games as the season's gone on. I could see them playing another game or 2, but I don't think it's going to be like a dramatic uptick.
Riley Van Poppel's currently at 3. Dwight Boodle is currently at 3. Amari Sanders is currently at 3. Larry Tarver is currently at 3. So we could see one more from those guys. Donovan Jones is at 2.
Freshman.
Bryce Turner is at 1. Malachi Coleman is at 1. Bly Hill is at 1. Mekhi Nelson, who got a mention this week, is at 1. That's maybe an area. And that's kind of, I mean, Isaiah McMorris, so
yeah,
maybe.
One thing to note on that, if Nebraska plays in a bowl game and players have played the full 4 and at the limit for a red shirt, they can play in a bowl game.
Yep.
It doesn't count.
Yep. All right. 2 more. Doc from Twitter. If Nebraska can't run the ball now, why does changing the play caller make any difference?
It doesn't. Simple answer, but it can if the execution is better at the things that Nebraska does other than running the ball. If Nebraska can get things opened up in the pass game, it's going to be able to run the ball. If Nebraska can execute some of the plays that have not worked in the run game, it's going to be able to run the ball better. The play caller himself, like Dana Holgorsen's it's not a magic pill for Nebraska football. So while he has had success out of the air raid and spread sets, being able to run and even run power with some of his backs, it doesn't mean just because you put him on the coaching staff that it's going to make any difference at all. He can introduce concepts. He can have suggestions for other assistant coaches, whether it's EJ Barthel or Donovan Raiola, and how to get the run game jump started. but the players have to go out and do it. And that's been a message from Matt Rhule over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, in the future, I mean, Nebraska can make it easier on themselves with the way they scheme the runs. We'll see how much of that we see in the final 3 games, But like, I guess to Doc's question, it's not as simple all the time as, the offensive line is bad, so you can't run the ball, and we're going to talk about the offensive line here in our final question coming up in a second. Nebraska can make it a little bit easier on themselves, but yeah, it's going to have to simply just execute some things better down the stretch. But and then you get the fresh, you get the fresh air in the room from the offensive coordinator, and we don't know how it's going to work. They probably still won't be able to run the ball in the last 3 games of the season, if that's your question.
A lesson from this year, and I think this is arguably an unforgivable mistake that Nebraska's made. And it would go on Satterfield. It would go, on Rhule because he's in charge. I think Nebraska took for granted somewhat, and this is probably more on the coordinator. I think Nebraska took for granted somewhat that its production in the run game was going to be there because of the success that it had running the ball last year without a strong passing game. And that just hasn't been the case. Taking the QB run element out of the recipe to run the ball, and then other things too. It's just not the same team. To just expect that was going to happen, which is and maybe I totally misread the room, but that's the vibe that I got from Satterfield before the season. It was, we're going to be able to run the ball. We can scheme run plays. What we have to do is figure out a way to do those other things to move up and down the field in the passing game. That's what the focus is. And I just think you cannot take that for granted, not with the level of talent that Nebraska has or the lack of talent at certain spots and playing in the conference you play in. It has to be a priority all through the offseason and every week in the season.
It's drastically changed the math, that's for sure. All right, and a final question here from Hound on YouTube. Was it worth keeping Dylan's uncle as the offensive line coach to get Dylan? So far, not so much. And Dylan is the one paying the price.
Yeah, I don't think that Donovan Rhule kept his job in order for Nebraska to get Dylan Rhule. I think Matt Rhule legitimately picked him heading into the 2023 season that month of December when Dylan was committed to first Ohio State and then, yes, back on the market, but soon after that committed to Georgia. I think Matt Rhule legitimately picked Donovan Rhule because he thought that Donovan Rhule's what he offered as an O-line coach fit with what Matt Rhule wanted for his offense. Will it fit with what Dana Holgorsen wants for his offense? Well, that's a question that we may have to answer in the offseason. And while I don't think they're going to send Donovan Rhule packing, if it's a new offense, he may bring in some coaches. That's very possible that Nebraska will have changes beyond Marcus Satterfield on the offensive side of the football heading into 2025. We'll see. We'll see how it goes with the offensive line. But I don't believe that Donovan is here solely because of the quarterback.
Totally with you. It's a bogus narrative, honestly. Nebraska was prepared to move on with life without Dylan Rhule like 2 days before they got, or 10 seconds before they got Dylan Rhule, Did they give themselves a better chance in the long run by having Donovan on the staff for getting him? Like, probably, but that's not the sole reason why they did it. I mean, once again, not everything's black and white here. That's not why Donovan Rhule is Nebraska's offensive line coach.
The main thing having Donnie on staff did to get Dylan is it just gave Nebraska access. It gave Nebraska access to Dylan, and it gave Dylan access to Nebraska because Dylan's father, Dominic, could just call his brother whenever, much more easily than he could call Marcus Satterfield or Matt Rhule. So there was access there. There was a process to be able to learn about the program and learn about the player on both sides. That made it easier. But I don't think it was like the key in either decision, the decision to keep Donovan or the decision by the Rhules to come to Nebraska.
All right, that's it for us today. We'll talk to you tomorrow when we pick this thing. Yeah, we're going to talk about a football game finally on the show tomorrow, and there is some intrigue to it. appreciate you making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. You can find the Locked On Big Ten podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.